Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, October 13th, day 738 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian, on this historic day. Hi, Manny.
Hi, Amanda.
Thanks so much for joining me. Now, as we're recording, U.S. President Donald Trump has just finished a landmark speech in Israel's Knesset following the release of the final 20 living hostages in the Gaza Strip from Hamas captivity. So Manny will take us through the releases and what we know about their health status right now. We'll talk a little bit about the mood in the country on this very emotional day and more after the break. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. As we are recording, it's just ahead of the Simhat Torah holiday here in Israel, and U.S. President Donald Trump just finished a long and extremely colorful speech in the Knesset, in which, among other statements, he firmly announced the end of the Gaza War. He, during the speech, recognized many main players who brought about the peace deal and joked that he was running very late for his date in Egypt with Arab and Muslim country leaders. He also called on President Isaac Herzog to pardon Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is currently on trial on corruption charges and stands accused of fraud and breach of trust over a scandal involving the acceptance of luxury gifts. Quoting Trump here, "I have an idea. Why don't you give Netanyahu a pardon?" he said, directing his comments to Herzog, who is in the Knesset forum. So tomorrow I will speak with Times of Israel editor David Horowitz in depth about this speech, about reports of direct talks between the United States and Hamas, and much, much more. That's tomorrow. But as we say, that's a whole Megillah, and it's worthy of its own program. So today is a day for celebration as our remaining living hostages are now home. And I am going to speak about how they came to be reunited with their families. So Manny, I think for many, many journalists here in Israel, it was a day of split screen, meaning there is so much going on all day long. And from what time have you been in the captain's seat reporting on what's happening with the hostages today?
So, luckily for me and many other reporters, the army did tell us last night that the release would likely begin at around 8 a.m. So I was able to wake up beforehand, but of course, because I have a newborn at home, it's been a bit difficult with sleep in general. But from 8, we were essentially ready for this release. Slightly before we started getting reports of the Red Cross heading to the first hostage handover site, where the first 7 were released, and then I think it was by maybe 10 a.m. or maybe just before 11, where the next 13 hostages released from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. And this is mostly on the schedule that the army had sort of assessed beforehand of how it was going to be carried out. And of course, Hamas did not hold these hostage release ceremonies this time, which I think made it maybe go a bit faster than usual. But I'd have to go back and check exactly how long those ones, the previous ones, took.
It's true that the ceremonies weren't held, but there were, of course, some conversations. Hamas phoned up one of the hostage families on FaceTime, and the hostage families who are assembled at Re'im, which is close to the Gaza Strip border, basically passed around a phone that their loved ones who are in the second group who were let out were on screen next to their Hamas captors being passed around in a very surreal moment. This, of course, took the place of the ceremony, but it was kind of expected, wasn't it, Manny?
It was expected. The IDF assessed last night, and they said that Hamas would likely try and carry out provocations, they said, in lieu of the release ceremony. And the army specifically told us, the reporters, that they will likely try and phone up the parents or the families of the hostages and have them speak to each other for the first time in 2 years. And that is precisely what they did. They called, I think, some of the hostages that were set to be released in the second sort of round, the 13 who were released in southern Gaza, We know that at least one, the family refused to answer the phone when they got a phone call on, a FaceTime or a WhatsApp video call from the Al-Qassam Brigade, so they did not answer it. But others did. They were able to exchange a few words. And what you could hear, actually, interestingly, in these videos of this sort of short FaceTime, is you can hear the Hamas terrorists in the background saying, in Hebrew actually, and in English, make sure this goes on the news. So this was their attempt of basically replacing their hostage release ceremonies, which of course is meant for going on the news and for the Israeli public to see. And this is what they managed to do instead, which is I guess a bit of a sneaky way around it, because the agreement was don't carry out these provocations and propaganda ceremonies.
So there were two batches of hostages released today, a group of 7 and then a group of 13. Do you know why they were grouped in this way, Manny?
I presume that it's based on where they were held in Gaza. So in the past, we saw Hamas release them more or less from where they were being held. So the first 7 were likely all being held in Gaza City or potentially in central Gaza, and then they were moved up to Gaza City to be released there. And the other 13 were in southern Gaza or in central Gaza, and they were moved down to the south to be released from there. But I assume that's why Hamas did it that way. And I mean, they could have had them all released all at once, but I think logistically that's the reason why they did it in 2 batches and with a short break in between.
And of course, it's such an emotional day today. One of my coworkers, my deputy, asked me how I'm doing. And I said, I'm cry working. And for me, in particular, it really reminded me of 2 years ago when I would sit in front of my computer and I would be cry working. Then it was for grief. Today, it was, of course, for joy as we saw the reunion of these hostages, these released hostages with their families. And there are a couple who are more emotional on a national and perhaps international level than others. I would like to point to, of course, Avinatan Or, whose short video of when his girlfriend, Noah Argamani, was torn from his arms on October 7th, 2023 by the Hamas terrorists. That video, more than anything else, I think, circled the world and showed just how horrific this moment was. So tell us a little bit about Avinatan Or.
So we actually have not seen or heard from him since that video, since the video from the onslaught where you see him and Noah Argamani. Argamani, of course, was rescued by Israeli forces in June 2024 in the very daring operation in central Gaza where 4 hostages were rescued. But we haven't heard anything from him, no footage. I'm not certain that other hostages who returned brought back signs of life from him, even during his entire captivity. So there were a few hostages, and he's not the only one where there's been very little information since they were taken hostage on October 7th. When he was returned, we saw pictures that the IDF put out of him meeting troops in Gaza for the first time. And he does appear to be quite sort of visibly thin after spending 2 years in captivity. We've heard from previous hostages being released and even the ones now, assessments that they were tortured by Hamas and intentionally starved by Hamas and kept in tunnels and in cages and locked up, and terrible things. I'm sure we'll know a lot more once these hostages, are all at the hospitals and they get time to speak with their families and with mental health professionals. We'll probably know more, but definitely a case of sort of very unknown. We had no idea what his situation was going to be until he's back now.
That actually, Manny, and one perhaps is Eitan Mor as well. Do you know, did his family get a sign of life from him throughout the 2 years?
I think that's correct. I think Eitan more as well. There was a sort of on the morning of October 7th, I think he responded to his family on the phone, and there was sort of some sighting of him that morning, and then since then, nothing at all. And I'm not sure that as well during his captivity that there was any signs of life. What we saw sort of in the past is when hostages were released, then they would bring back information on the other hostages that they were held with, like with Yair Horn, who was released 8 months ago, and now his brother is back. And of course his brother was also seen in the video, but he brought back information on the hostages that were held alongside him. There were a few of these hostages who we did not hear anything about basically in the entire 2 years.
So what's interesting about Eitan Mor, or why he is particularly significant, is his parents, alongside other parents, formed this Tikva forum, which was a bit of a counter narrative to the Hostages Families Forum. And their main point among them was to have all the hostages released all at once, no partial deals, no selexia, no selection, they would say. And his father, Tzvika Mor, said that just prior to the October 7th massacre, when his son was kidnapped, they'd had a family dinner. And Eitan had said that, just, I mean, randomly, really, it's not something we talk about at our dinner table, but he said that if he were to be kidnapped, he would not want him to be traded, as it were, for political Palestinian prisoners who may have blood on their hands, etc. So this father, Tzvika Mor, started this Tikva forum, and he has been a driving voice on the, I would say, more national media. But I would say the woman who has been at the forefront of all the protests, all the rallies to free the hostages is Einav Zangaukar, and her son Matan came home today too. What do you know about Matan, Manny?
Matan Zangaukar, of course, Einav has been one of, I would say, probably the most prominent of the hostage families, the most prominent one. I think it's every Saturday night when they hold their sort of the main weekly protest. She's always at the front, always giving a speech, and been really fighting for her son's release. And he was abducted from his home in Kibbutz Nir Oz alongside his partner, who was released in I think it was the first deal in November 2023. And there has not been, I don't think, that many signs of life coming from Zangaukar during the war, but we did see, I mean, even Hamas recognized that Einav is sort of this very prominent person among the hostages families, and they've in the past released like a picture of him at one point, and they've also put him in various propaganda videos. So I think that definitely one of the more prominent hostages now to be freed.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I am Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian, on this extremely historic day. Let's continue speaking about some of the more prominent hostages that were released today. And there were two sets of brothers, which is, of course, extremely moving. Gali Berman and Ziv Berman were reunited. I'm not sure if they were kept together for the entirety or even part of their captivity. And as a mother of twins, of course, this hits me very deeply. Manny, what do you know about their status?
So Gali and Ziv Berman were both released together. We don't know, of course, if they were held together the entire time. They were abducted from Kfar Aza. There was, I think, 37 people taken from Kfar Aza, as one of the areas in the Gaza border communities that was hit the hardest. And we saw them in photos together and embracing after reaching Israeli troops, and that's as much as really we know right now. And again, I'm sure once they meet their families, they'll be able to tell them, and then the media will know about what they went through during their captivity. And then, of course, the second set of brothers are the Kunios, David and Ariel, not twins. Gali and Ziv are twins. They as well, we don't know if they were held together or not. I think there were 4 Cunio brothers who were taken captive on October 7th, along with Arbel Yehud, who is Ariel Cunio's girlfriend, who was taken by, I think, Islamic Jihad, and then also freed in the previous deal.
Yes, Arbel and Ariel are expected to be reunited, hopefully today. And in terms of other notable people, every single person here on this list is notable. And I would have to say, in going through their stories today as part of my job, I noted that so many of these people were taken captive because they were at the Supernova Festival and helping others who were wounded or helping others try to escape. And that is when they were taken themselves. So every single person here on this list is just a special, special individual. And of course, all of Israel. And I may say that much of the world is really pulling for them. So at the same time, as I mentioned, US President Donald Trump really firmly announced yet again and answered reporters' questions on the fly, saying that the war in Gaza is over, Manny. So I don't know if that's going to play out to be correct or not. But in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about what's happening on the ground and more specifically, how many soldiers have fallen during this operation?
Well, I'll start by saying that I do think that the war is over, provided, of course, that Hamas releases the remaining bodies that it's still holding. We're still, of course, waiting on that. There's 28 more bodies that they're holding, and not all of them it knows where they are, and we're expecting them to be released. But aside from that, if that goes ahead, then I do think that the war is over. And to summarize that, in total, since the beginning of the war, including October 7th and including all fronts, Lebanon, the West Bank, Iranian missiles, attacks from Iraq, Syria. I'm not sure actually if any soldiers were killed in Syria. The Houthi attacks, etc. Everything. We're talking about 915 IDF soldiers who were killed. In addition, there are also, I think, around 60 police officers. There's Shin Bet members. There's several civilians who were killed in, I would say, combat circumstances. Defense Ministry civilian contractors who are operating in Gaza. The IDF doesn't recognize them as fallen soldiers, but I think we at the Times of Israel count them as part of our Israel's toll in the ground offensive against Hamas. The army states that 468 soldiers have been killed in the Gaza Strip during the ground offensive, so excluding the attacks on October 7th, excluding the clearing operations in southern Israel, just in the ground offensive. And in addition, of course, like I mentioned, there's several, I think 3 civilian defense ministry contractors and 2 border police officers who were also killed in Gaza. In terms of wounded, and these stats are a little bit sort of misleading, but in Gaza, the IDF reports that nearly 3,000 soldiers were wounded. But I think this number is a little bit lower than what it actually is, because the army only really reports injuries where soldiers were taken to hospitals and hospitalized for a certain amount of time. If they get released very quickly, I don't think it's registered. But we're talking about 564 in serious condition, 874 in moderate condition, and 1,500 who are lightly hurt. Sort of outside of all of those numbers, the Defense Ministry's Rehabilitation Department, which also count soldiers who are suffering mental health conditions, PTSD, they say that since the beginning of the war, they've received around 20,000 soldiers, and about half of them are suffering from PTSD. So you can see that there's a bit of a difference in the numbers. And I'll add, even among the wounded soldiers, the one that the army actually logs in its data, many of them actually return to fighting. So a lot of those who are lightly injured return to combat. Even some who were seriously wounded returned to doing other jobs in the IDF. Not all of them were completely taken out of service. But there are, of course, dozens of those who have very severe disabilities now from the war, from the fighting.
Yeah, several of the released hostages were soldiers and taken as soldiers. And at least one of them's commander, Matan Angrest, said, "We're waiting for you to come back to the division." There have been cases of released hostages returning to the army. It's not out of the question, but it is it's a big ask, I would say, after serving the country so deeply as a hostage, of course. Manny, how many of the hostages were soldiers, in fact?
So Matan Angrest, of course, like you mentioned, he served in the 77th Armored Battalion in a tank on the Gaza border on the morning of October 7th. And then interestingly, so he's also Nimrod Cohen. He was also a soldier abducted from a tank in a similar area that morning. And then those were the 2 on-duty soldiers. And then in addition, from what I understand, Ron Broslavsky, he was a security guard at the Nova Music Festival, but he was an off-duty soldier. So he was in his regular army service when he was abducted, so he's considered a soldier, of course, still. And this wasn't something hidden or anything. Hamas knew that he was a soldier as well, but he was not on duty, of course, during the rave near Re'im at the Nova Music Festival. There are also, among the bodies of the dead hostages, there are also several soldiers who have yet to be returned to Israel.
Right. And as of now, as you mentioned earlier, we do not still know when or even if all the bodies will be returned. So this is, of course, something to look at in our live blog, among so much other information that we didn't cover in this podcast, but there's so much more to talk about tomorrow. So Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.